they screwed up. They had the list with his name on. They also didn't do Cecil. I mean, he didn't care. He's got this. He thinks he's entitled to it. Anyway, so he says, he didn't even call me. So I checked with him. So I said, all I can say is, and so pretty soon the phone starts ringing. I know what's going to happen. He's just going to explode. So I just text him. I said, Bill, for the city, it's going to get me. And I'll call you tomorrow. I may have blown it. I don't know. All of it.
A little bit of the condensed version of it, but then you're going to also talk about some feedback.
Now that I got those things, I good. See that detail on the elevation. Create another sheet for detail. Well, that doesn't take long to do. These, everything just started falling in place. Just bang. I thought about it about, I think it was about 11 o'clock. It's just a day I'm supposed to read again. And then I thought, I don't think it is. It might be Thursday. And I completely put it out of my mind. I'm just moving.
Well, that's
Well, I mean, he started out as a UPS driver, worked himself up to being some kind of vice president, and he was with him for 30 years, a lot of different states, a lot of money. He just thinks it makes him Mr.
We did because I did this at the end. Before the
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Arlene Hunter. I'm the city manager for the city of Bonita Springs, and we thank you for coming this evening. This is a continuation of our city council's project for looking at form-based code in our downtown. Some of you may recall back in September, we had DPZ here to do a series of workshops where we presented an introduction to form-based code. From that, the city council decided to pursue looking at the potential form of what that might look like, looking at in more detail building form, building orientation, building character, setbacks, green space. This would be the outline of the formation of a code for the downtown. And we'll continue to receive public feedback through this process. Tomorrow, DPZ will be here for open office hours. Folks have been making appointments on specific projects they have. If there's an interest for that, we can work to schedule a time with them as well. Additionally, DPZ will be presenting to our city council tomorrow night. It will be a little bit more of a condensed version of what you receive here tonight, and then they'll also be providing feedback to the council as this process moves along and asking for further in detail direction from them at that time. I would like to make a couple of quick introductions. We have our council member Mike Gibson right here, council member Fred Forbes, and we have our LPA member Sam Vincent. We have our assistant city manager Matt Feeney. And so for those folks, so they understand, is with the council members here present, they're absolutely welcome to be here and present and listen, but they'll probably reserve any specific comments they have for for our regular city council meeting, where it would be part of the regular process, since these may be potential items that they vote on in the future. And with that, I'd just want to remind everyone to please sign the comment cards in to fill out the sign-in sheet in the back, and there are comment cards as well. You can also email myself or our city clerk to have any comments registered for the record, and we will forward those to DPZ through this process as well. And we continue to take public comment through the process. And with that, I'd like Galina to come up, and she'll start the introduction and introduce her team.
Good afternoon, everybody. So everybody's far away. I guess we are scary. But if you want to move on this side, but actually it's a good view on this side. We are happy to be here again. It has been 2-3 months without being at Bonita Springs, so it's we felt we have to come this way. We are located in Miami, and I have with me Javier Iglesias, Senior Project Manager at DPZ, and also Paul Genovese, Project Manager. We will be hopefully coming a few more times to work on the smart code, on this code, form-based code, and finalize it for the city of Bonita Springs. In October, some of you probably were part of the public presentation. It was a public, actually, feedback session. And then we introduced kind of the main elements and the main goals of the smart, again, I'm saying smart code. And I will explain why. The idea was that we will create a form-based code for your city. You have been working on a lot of these ideas for a long time, and you have had sessions and public input for a long time. There was a whole range of documentation and work done prior to our start here at Bonita Springs, which we we saw that you really care about your downtown, and it's a very important focal point for the whole city. And with the big public investment which you already have done in the downtown, in the millions of dollars with the infrastructure, obviously the next step will be to invite the public, the private investment. So we based our research and analysis of your regulations with the idea of the bigger picture of the growth for the city. During our last public presentation, the feedback presentation workshop, we heard very loud and clear that one of the most important intentions and goals of this form-based code is to create an environment, the downtown, to create an environment where it will be an interesting environment for the younger generation, for the young people. So will be a place which will be a mixed use, walkable, with great streets, with nice restaurants, hopefully cafes, bars, interesting things. in the downtown, but also living. So, you know, the living and the work and the play environment are close by together. So this was a kind of probably the most important feedback and takeaway from our meetings. Now I have to probably find a way to turn the I guess this one, right, oops, right here, to turn the slides. So the workshop agenda tonight will be to walk you through more or less the structure of the future code, or the main components which will be included in this document. I keep on saying smart code, smart code. Actually, our firm initiated such a code which was supposed to provide municipalities with a very a kind of comprehensive ordinance on which municipalities will base their future growth. And we call it smart code because smart growth was a kind of the interesting and fashionable word a few years ago. We wanted to basically enable municipalities to have a choice in the way they grow. Till recently, and even today, communities have two main choices in their way of their growth. One is a kind of the most suburban way, where the cars are central to the development, and then the other way, which is the more focused on pedestrian environment, mixed use, compact development, all of that. So with the introducing the smart code for municipalities was this intention. Generally in the country, the smart code was accepted as, it has been called for many, many years, a form-based code. And this is a form-based code because it's in its center, in its kind of focus is on the form of the buildings and not so much on the uses. What I mean by that is that how our streets and public spaces are shaped is more central and more important than what people basically do in the buildings. Today in our downtown specifically and in other urbanized areas, we don't have some of these dangerous industrial uses which were once. So it's not so important whether we have to separate the different uses. The other type of coding, the Euclidean coding, which is very much land use focused, actually created the separation of uses, the separation of residential, the separation of industrial, office, and retail uses into kind of the suburban enclaves which we have today. But I think that Bonita, and I should not probably go into so much detail, talking about this, because Bonita Springs has gone much further, along the path of creating, walkable and compact and mixed-use environments. We were here last year doing the Bonita Beach Road land use study, which we focused on this your main kind of gateway corridor, but the downtown, and it's a kind of, along that corridor, there are a lot of these issues of more suburban development. The downtown is basically a very clear place, which with its small walkable blocks, with its nice, great recent infrastructure, actually is the place to develop and to introduce the form-based code to Bonita Springs. Down the line, if you see that the buildings and the new development which comes out of this new code you like as a community, this code can be actually implemented, adapted to the rest of the city. So in many places around the country, we have done this, starting with a small section of the city, and then some action starts, and buildings according to the vision of the community starts developing, and then they say, oh, look, this works very well for us, let's go and do the code for everything else. Here the task is basically to take the many documents and overlays and regulatory frameworks which you have been working through, and it's like you have, and I think that later I have like a whole bunch of materials, and to replace them with a very succinct and very simple and very walkability and compact development focused downtown form-based code. So the existing regulatory context, we'll talk a little bit about that, the components of the form-based code, we will look at this as well, the mapping of the zones, potential form-based code contents, which is basically the table of contents. This is something which is fairly technical, and many of these drawings here and diagrams which I will show tonight are technical in nature, and they may be slightly boring. So, you know, we intersperse them with some drawings which we have done either specifically here for Bonita Springs, or we have done in other places, you know, just to make it more understandable. Last time we were here, we presented a lengthier document called Form-Based Code, the Introduction to the Form-Based Code for downtown Bonita Springs. I think that the PowerPoint is already on the website. The full document, if you are interested in more details, you can approach the city and they will give you the document in its full length. We couldn't present everything during these public presentations. And then at the end of this session, we will have community feedback and public comment and how we will be moving forward with the next steps. Oh, okay, these are basically the existing regulatory context, you know, starting many years ago with, I'm not even sure what these were, but it's a lot of the documents which we looked at, the zoning code. There was also a very nice white paper written like a few months ago, which was very informative, giving us a kind of a very succinct summary of all the public workshops where you have talked about these issues. And also in the current existing code, we actually saw many elements of this smart code, which I mentioned to you. So we knew that you as a community and your leadership and your staff actually are already familiar with form-based coding. You're already implementing a lot of these form-based principles, like, for example, how you position the buildings, and I'm talking about the overlay in the downtown. You know, that the buildings should be with parking which is hidden in the back, you regulate height, you know, some relationship to the sidewalk and all of that. So what we want to create now is a kind of a finalized, a good document, well illustrated, and also not only illustrated, but also with a good background, a good backup in kind of the lawyer's language. You know, the law has to be in a written form and also in a drawing form. So there will not be any doubts or any kind of lengthy negotiation. You know, we would like to create a document which is basically representing the vision of the community, what you would like to see as a community, and then to make this code basically easy to implement. It will be a code which the public sector will be incentivized to go for it, you know, with this vision, you know, okay, the community wants this, I'm going to provide this type of building. We agree on how this building will look. It will be this high, that, you know, it will be a shop front, let's say, and then maybe some residential above. It will have this kind of relationship to the sidewalk. And the community, if the community has agreed to this overall vision, then the process will not be necessary to go for every project to go through public hearings and lengthy, you know, council meetings and all of that. We heard that it's a lengthy process these days. You know, that for some projects which are mixed-use nature, you need to go to even comprehensive plan amendments and things like this. So we believe that with this simpler, more user-friendly code will be easier for the public sector to administer, and then for the private sector to actually invest in your community. So these are some of the elements and some of the drawings which we saw. This is basically direct quotes from the smart code, and they're in your current code. So we will be updating those. Some of the potential components or table of contents, it doesn't need to be in the same order, but these are the things which we're talking about. And usually, you know, we have done about, I mean, I don't know how many codes we have done around the country, maybe hundreds, maybe 100, we haven't counted them, but we know that form-based codes, based on the smart code, there are about 650 around the country. You know, there are many, many more municipalities in the thousands, like 40,000. So there is a long way to go with the form-based kind of regulatory environment. However, many of them have been quite successful, and there are many places around the country where you can go and visit and talk to whether public officials or to residents and see how they have accepted and whether they have been successful building upon the form-based codes. So usually a code has an intent, it has existing conditions to some extent, then it shows the boundary of the place where, you know, boundaries of for this code, applicability, you know, procedures for review, appeals and variances. Some of these, the procedures and appeals and variances may go further down, you know, somewhere at in the lower table of contents. Then we have urban design standards and guidelines, landscape design, thoroughfare standards, special districts and overlays, and plan developments and assemblages. That's a kind of a very simple table of contents, which, again, I said it's technical in nature, but I will walk you through it. The intent usually comes out of the basically out of the feedback from the community. And I may start it actually reading it from the bottom up. You know, the big themes will be about scale, meaning that what we heard is that, yes, you want to remain, at least the downtown, you want to remain a kind of the small town charm and the place of a small town. You don't want a mega development, you know, you don't want people to come and assemble huge pieces of land and basically destroy the kind of South Floridian South Floridian character of the place. It's about aesthetics. We heard also this loud and clear, that it will be the Florida cracker, maybe some mid-century, that you don't, you know, necessarily like, you know, other styles, or, you know, some imported, you know, architecture syntaxes from other places. It will be about predictability. It will be predictability for the private sector. You know, right now, in many places, you have an overlay with some restrictions and zoning a kind of predictability, but it will be good that also formally, as the form, people will know that next door it's not going to be a, you know, let's say a gas station or something like that. You know, that they're building something within the restrictions of the form-based code, and then next door will be something different. So it's about predictability and also maintenance of the value of people's properties. And of course, new investment, and this is new investment and economic growth within which we want to include the younger generation. You know, it's not only because of the smaller scale, we believe that people with, you know, which are starting, that are local, that they may be interested to invest and maybe be part of the economic growth, not only be the users on the user end, but also participants in this kind of next economic phase. You know, the other ones are encourage mixed-use development. Oh, sorry. Encourage mixed-use development, which is obvious within the downtown areas, support of viable, diverse, locally oriented businesses and cultural institutions. You have all of these things happening there. We saw the county library, you know, taking shape. You know, there are many things to be said about the scale and all of that. You know, but it's a civic building, and the county is paying for it, I guess. Is it? Yeah. So I guess, you know, we have to be happy and to be grateful that this is a building right there. And because you have the big park in the front, the big square, actually the scale is appropriate. It's a big building. We can have opinions on the style and all of that, but actually it's a good contribution to your downtown. And you have many elements of cultural, you know, heritage and all locally oriented businesses. I talked about capitalize on the opportunities to attract development of a variety of building types, support the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. We heard loud and clear that we have to stay within the comprehensive plan. We will be seeing whether there are any conflicts with the comprehensive plan, and if there are any, we'll be discussing possible, kind of integration or even some changes to the comp plan. And then enable coherent walkable streetscape, which we talked about, context-based development, complete streets, ensure more predictable, which was about the predictability. This is a list which we'll be working together with you, and if you have other ideas, we can craft and wordsmith it and all of that. We will be working also with the staff and the city leadership on this particular kind of introduction to the code. In the prior presentations, we talked about the flexibility of this form-based code, according to the comfort level of the community. We can basically, and here we are demonstrating that the code can be presented as a thermostat. It can be dialed up or down according to your kind of desire for control, for lesser or for more. For example, in this case, you're controlling the shape of the building, how it meets the sidewalk, whether it's a shop front or a gallery, height, volume, the parking in the back. And then if you want to go even further, you can address architectural features, windows, and roof configurations, materials, colors, etc., etc. We were just talking before about the colors of the new colors of the City Hall and how, everybody has opinions on these things. Some things are very subjective. So in codes, some of these things are depending on your desire for predictability. We can have ranges. The good thing about the form-based code is that it is parametric. We call it parametric because it's never about one choice, it's never about one number, but it's about parametric metrics, I guess. For example, if you have here, because this is on a shopfront situation, a street which is a retail street, perhaps the setback is very small. When you have a small sidewalk, and in an existing condition situation, this is usually the case. The sidewalk is not wide enough. So there is the possibility for us, instead of saying, okay, the setback will be 0, because you want the shop fronts, the retail, to be very close to the sidewalk. But if the sidewalk is too small, then maybe we can give the setback to be a little bit deeper, so some of this easement on the private property to enlarge the sidewalk and maybe create a plaza or a outdoor seating area or a cafe or whatever. So these are some of the things, So the setbacks in most cases are usually, let's say from 5 to 15 feet or 5 to 10 feet. It's never just one direct number. These are some of the background materials which we worked on before, a few months back. This is we call synoptic survey, which is analyzing your local good examples. Like, for example, we went and drove around and walked around the downtown, the neighborhoods, and the downtown core, looking at examples of what can be taken kind of as a local genetic material, which is a good frontage, whether it's one of the little cafes, and I think that I can hardly see which one. I like one of these is the commercial, some of the in the residential neighborhoods, some houses which are good with a kind of the garage is a little bit further back, so it's not the parking is not in your face, and things like that. And we saw that in this case it will be not entirely, the code is not going to be 100% based only on what you have. We will put it kind of at the next level. We will be thinking about the next generation of development. So, we will be looking also at examples around the country, or, for similar conditions. But in general, we look at and here, these are the things, the public frontage, the right-of-way width, the travel lanes, the parking, all these physical metrics which make up our public environment through the means of the private frontage. Then we also introduced, and we talked about it, about the TRANSECT, I believe even in the, also in the Bonita Beach Road land use study, where we introduced the idea of the TRANSECT, which is, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it or remember it, but it's basically a system of classification deploying the conceptual range of rural to urban to arrange in appropriate order the typical elements of urbanism. And you can see here that the TRANSECT goes from nature through rural to suburban, general urban, urban center, urban core, meaning from the most natural and rural all the way to the most urban condition. And this is a principle or a method which was borrowed from ecologists. It's an ordering and organizational system where biologists actually were organizing the flora and fauna according to different species, and in certain environments, you know, flowers or plants or and plants and animals prefer this type of environment. Others, you know, the hillier or the you know, the mountainous terrain or the water. And it's very similar with the human species. You know, some people prefer to be in the downtown, others a little bit further away in the more residential neighborhood. So we don't preclude anything. We don't say, no, you're not going to have that. We basically allocate it. Even the gas station or the auto repair, they have their place. In this particular, in your particular downtown, you have, there will be a special district, which is an industrial area, which will be maybe some of these things will be allowed there, whether it's I don't know, gas station, some repair, or some kind of an industrial, very light industrial use, or whatever the community decides on. And of course, in the downtown area, in the most urban area, in the core area, it will be a mix of restaurants and shops and residential and offices, and then which is this area. We will have 3 main TRANSECT zones, and each of some of them will have sub areas. For example, T5, we call it the urban center. Usually, the TRANSECT goes all the way to T6, which is the urban core. But because you are a small town, downtown, then yeah, you will probably be at the level of a kind of a main street urban center where you have mixed-use buildings, you know, vertically mixed, but also some buildings which will be horizontally mixed. Horizontally mixed meaning that some will be commercial, and now you have exactly that. Now are purely commercial, and then next door are residential buildings. This is also a mixed-use environment. It doesn't need to be like the pancake type of vertical mixed use. You can have mixed use horizontally assembled. And this is basically the flexibility of this form-based code. Then there is a general urban area where it's a kind of a mix of houses, townhouses, small apartment buildings. There will be a probably much lower commercial activity, if any. You know, like something like a live-work unit, maybe a corner, like a corner cafe. Maybe not. And then the predominantly, we call it suburban, which it's predominantly residential, where it's, you know, your normal bigger houses, and you have plenty of that. So the, and here these zones, like T5 here, T4 and T3, are basically illustrated with a mix of places here in Bonita Springs and also around the country. You know, basically, we didn't find, for example, we didn't find a small apartment building which is, you know, 2 stories and looks like a house, a bigger house, but it's a small apartment building. Let's say, you know, 4 to 6 units or something like that, which are very versatile, very nice building type for younger people, which, you know, do not necessarily prefer a large apartment complex, and they would like to be in a place of single-family housing close to a school or close to the downtown, and still be in a more affordable and a more walkable environment close to the downtown. Or a townhouse, for example. This is a townhouse which recently, in recent years, in the last 50, 60 years, townhouses have received a bad name because they were townhouses in the middle of suburbia, townhouses which were without the town. You know, they were like little, you know, train racks in the middle of parking lots and not townhouses as part of a town. So it's a building type which has returned a lot in, at least in around the country. This is in Coral Gables, which is also a leafy suburb, like a suburb of Miami, but they have townhouses, and they're extremely successful because of the shifting of the market. You know, the younger generation wants smaller units, fee simple, like single-family housing, but without the big yard to maintain, as well as the retiring population. And right now, actually, in your neighborhoods, in your residential areas, you have the townhouse as an allowed use or building type. So these zones, which you see here, basically are based on your town center concept plan. This is the old US 41 corridor redevelopment master plan, with basically which registers most of the I imagine that this came as a document following a lot of public involvement. What we noticed is that it is a kind of very specific, you know, zoning. Like there was like one piece here, and I don't remember where exactly it was like, oh, this will be a hotel, or this will be the townhouses right here or right there. It was very a kind of not spot zoning, but very specific in its predictability. What we would like to propose is a little bit more flexible environment of this kind of the main corridor, which will be along Old 41, which is the most intense. And you see here we have two colors for the T5 or the core zone, a little lighter and a little darker. The darker is obviously where it's the most mixed use, the most kind of intense urban area. And then the rest here is T4, which will be this mix between townhouses, which are now allowed actually in your zoning right now. So it's like houses, townhouses, small apartment buildings, perhaps, you know, all of these things. And then it's your transition T3 to your more suburban residential areas on the east and also on the west. Here, this neighborhood, which I'm forgetting the name of it, we are calling it, basically the TRANSECT zone 3. It is restricted because it will be, we know that there are many historic houses there. It's a more historic fabric, and we don't need to do anything about this area. It's more restricted. That's we call it restricted. The more open one is here, where there is a kind of a transition along a busier road here, which I cannot see which road was this. But these basically, the two plans are very similar in terms of the building types and the zoning which is proposed. The only difference is perhaps the slight expansion of the borders. You can see that this is the black line is corresponding to the town center concept. Like here we expanded because it's a good idea to have the same zone on both sides of the street. So the street is a kind of symmetrical. You know, you don't want one side to be one thing and then on the other side of the street to be something different. So we expanded in the areas where this asymmetry was existing. There was some feedback when we presented last time this master plan, this regulating plan, sorry, all this thing. This regulating plan, we heard that we have made some mistakes, you know, or some people said, oh, this color you have to expand, you have to move it around. You know, this is the beginning of the mapping exercise, so we will be working together with you all to look, oh, this is what you mean, okay. He was making that, you have to just say it. But just to show here the boundary, the existing boundary, and then how we are expanding one layer outside of this, of the boundary. So if the street, you know, has a symmetrical, like right here, so the street feels more symmetrical on both sides. Not that it's impossible to be asymmetrical. If you decide that no, you want your boundary of the downtown to be in the middle of the road, this can be, but you know, we recommend the other way. And then this was another public workshop comment. I think that we had here a different color, T-zone, so we basically changed it as recommended. The applicability of the form-based code, what does it mean? I said before is that it applies to the existing Bonita Springs downtown master plan zone and additional blocks shown on the previous slide. But actually it is expandable, as I mentioned, it can go further. It's either for the nodes along the Bonita Beach Road, the intersections with the big thoroughfares, you can apply form-based code only for those. Because today we were driving along the Bonita Beach Road, and honestly, it's not gonna be, it's not gonna be urbanized very, anytime soon. It is basically a more suburban type of thoroughfare because it's your major east-west transportation corridor. It will be important that your nodes are of different character, so you know that you're arriving to downtown. The one with the intersection with the old 41 is probably the most important, as your gateway on the east side and also to the beaches. So these areas are, you can probably think about expanding the form-based code there. It also, as I mentioned, it replaces the prior regulatory documents. So this is its applicability. We are trying to get all these documents, which now you have to look through and maybe replace it with something thin, user-friendly, effective, and predictable, and also inviting, for people to come and to basically invest in your downtown, and also move here. The important thing is not only people to invest, but also to move and come and live here. And maybe even, you will not be as some of many other communities around the country. Actually, to begin with, we probably don't have that much young population. You want to be so attractive that they come here. And we heard actually loud and clear before, young people who live in, Cape Cod? Was it Cape Cod? Oh, Cape Coral, I'm sorry, Cape Coral. Cape Coral, they were driving, they work either here or they work down in Naples, and they pass by here and say, oh, I would love to live here, actually. It's much shorter, the jobs maybe here or in Naples. They would love to live here instead of in Cape Coral. So that's your chance to actually capture this younger generation here, so you have a future as a community. Standards are okay, and then we talk about, and you probably saw a sprinkle through the text, standards and guidelines, and these are two different things. Standards are usually the ones which will be written in the law, and they are activated by the word shall. When you say building shall be, 4 stories maximum, this is basically the law. You know that you cannot go above 4 stories, but also you can apply guidelines which are activated by should. For example, what is a guideline which should? Like maybe the frontage of a building should be 3 different types of frontage. It can be a front yard or something else. I just cannot think of one guideline which is should. What can it be? Your window proportions. We were talking about the window proportions of the library and how it's a kind of a saving element. It's really beautiful that they're vertical and big and all of that. Maybe you decide that all of your windows throughout the downtown should be a vertical proportion. But because it's a kind of, but maybe somebody does a building in more Art Deco architecture syntax and they want to have horizontal. That's why you put, and you're not certain and you want to see it, how it will be built. You say windows should be vertical proportion, meaning that it's not mandatory, it's recommended. And people usually tend, because it's easier. You have something, and it's written there, should be, and they know that probably it will be, easier to have approvals and everything when they follow the guidelines. But these are recommendations and not necessarily the mandatory rules. So there will be standards and there will be guidelines. These are the different tables, the TRANSECT zone descriptions, and then we had this something similar. These are basically tables from the standard smart code, which are, they have to be calibrated. These are a lot of metrics, the heights, the percentages, the setbacks, the parking, all of these things. These are basically numbers, very specific numbers, metrics, which bring, an environment which is you want to see in your neighborhood. So this is one which has to be calibrated for the local conditions, the building functions and uses. You can see here there are uses which are allowed in T3, some overlap in T3 and T4 and T5, some are not allowed at all, like what is that? Okay, a villa. I don't know what the villa is, but it's like probably a big McMansion. Well, it's not allowed anywhere in your downtown, and that's probably fine, you know. I mean, if you have even this described as a building type. Or, for example, a motel. A motel cannot be neither in T3 nor in T4, but why not in T5, if you want it, you know, whatever motel, whatever it means, you know. It can be an inn, or it can be a bed and breakfast. Like bed and breakfast, for example, we say here in this generic smart code, we say that it can be in T3, and T4, and T5. You know, maybe some of the larger houses, they're converted in bed and breakfast. There are many neighborhoods around Florida which are incredibly, you know, kind of revitalized because of the bed and breakfast element. You know, they became known on the map because there were a couple of, you know, bed and breakfasts in these places. And things like that. So these are the uses. Then building function, intensity, and parking. This is relationship of the different uses and the parking requirements. Usually we say that your intensity and your density actually is 100% dependent on the parking, how much parking you can fit. This actually, and I believe that you have some of these diagrams almost directly applied from the smart code in your current zoning code. This has been changing. All around the country, you know, municipalities have been reducing their parking requirements. There are cities even which basically they eliminated their parking requirements altogether. You know, in places you can build a building without any parking on site. And this is because it's in a downtown, it's a walkable environment. Why should we be applying, you know, requiring so much parking? The more parking you require, the lesser building envelope you leave for development. You know, you reduce your basically real estate, and then in many cases it becomes impossible to develop anything because parking is expensive. If you want to build something taller, then you have to go in a parking structure, and a parking spot is between 20 and 30,000 per parking spot. You can imagine. And recently what I learned is that we have 500 million parking spaces in this country. We're 350 million, but we have 500 million parking spaces. Can you imagine? I mean, in garages. So it's like totally insane. So it's, you know, but on the other hand, all the financial institutions are looking at where is your parking? You know, you build oh, we're not going to give you a loan because you don't have the parking, the necessary parking, which goes together with the building envelope. So these are actually, you know, subtle things which we have to work through together, and maybe have, again, like this dial up and down, like the thermostat, you know, like the formostat. Maybe we have to have a parkostat or something to be able to dial up and down the number of parking spaces required for each of the functions. You know, like, for example, many of these uses, actually, they can use a shared parking percentage. Like, for example, an office park is empty. Office park, you're not going to have here an office park. An office building is emptied late at night. Maybe you can share it with another function. Residential and office, you can share this parking. Retail, you know, with something else, you know, with residential, restaurants. These are things which, you know, we have done around the country, and they have been very happy because parking is, you know, you can be overwhelmed by a lack of parking if you are extremely, extremely successful. You know, that basically you are mobbed by, you know, people coming here, and it's absolutely possible, and it may be a good thing to have, but, you know, we have to basically calibrate it to your condition. You know, you will tell us what you want to see, whether you want to see parking garages, or whether you want to see surface parking, or something which is actually has the flexibility, the internal flexibility to be turned into something else in the future. Now with all the autonomous vehicles coming, and all Ubers and Lyfts and all of that, the parking becomes more and more obsolete. You know, we are learning that, you know, the kind of the optimistic predictions about the future of parking is that it will be going down and we will not need parking anymore. And then if you're building a garage, you have to think twice and 3 times over and be able to convert it in a few years into something else, and be very careful where you put your, investment in, because, parking is a kind of a flexible commodity. Till very recently it was pure gold. It still is gold because it will be the future real estate development. So in your case, because you have done such a great job with your infrastructure and you have parallel parking in many of the streets, that's great, because you have this already, you have this parking available, and you should not underestimate the power of on-street parking. It's very good for retail, it's very good for all kinds of businesses, and walkability because it protects the pedestrians. Frontages, this is also a very important element of the code, where we have assemblages of private frontage types, like for example, this is a gallery, a shop front with an awning, a stoop, a forecourt, and other, like all the way to a porch and a fence. And some of these you have here, very typical. You have houses with porches, and you have galleries. I don't think that you have any galleries. Maybe you don't, or arcades or whatever. If you would like to see some of those in your downtown, we can very easily implement them. Or it can be something very simple as awnings, for example, along your retail streets. Civic space, how you shape civic space, this is important, that there are different types, playground, plazas, squares, greens. I mean, that's also very important, how the terminology is defined, and how we can all, you as a community, can share the same terminology. Like for example here, why is it important to have a term like a plaza for something which looks like a square and then it's a green? Because they have different characters. It's open space, yes, it's open space, and there are buildings around, but they're different in character. And this will be actually the beauty, that you can go from one street to the next and encounter public spaces or streets of very different character. Along your main corridor is the most urban with the shops and all of this. Then you go further in and you maybe have a smaller, then you go to your square, let's say the big square in front of the library, but then maybe on the edges where the water is, where the creek is, the river, then you have a totally different character. So it cannot be the same design and the same means. They cannot be applied to these different places. So they have to be definitely varied. Oh, here it is, the definitions. We'll be talking. There will be a section on definitions, and some of them may be illustrated. This was also a building height study. This was part of this document, the introduction to the form-based code, where we discussed, and this is, I believe, illustrating, yes, here it is, building height studies along Old 41. We heard the preference for a kind of a higher intensity or density, 3-4 stories, but then also the desire for more diversity, that it's not a kind of a very monotonous wall of, let's say, if we allow 4 stories, everybody will go for 4 stories. Say, oh no, we want, everybody will want 4 stories, or maybe wait till a developer will come to develop something for 4 stories, and then you will be basically stuck for many years with nothing being developed or something like that. So this is also important to consider, what you prefer. This is, right now you have 1 story, mainly 1 story retail, the little shops, then a streetscape which will look something like this at 2 stories, predominantly 3, let's say, and then here 4 stories, 3 and 2 3 stories with a second floor setback, and then mixed height. And I think this one, 3-story with the second floor setback, is very similar to Naples. They have a very similar situation there. And then with the mixed heights, where you can have buildings which are 1 story, and it's difficult to see here, but it's like 1 story, 2-story, 3 stories, and 4 stories. And we started the discussion, are you going to put the 4 stories, and how are you going to allow this variety to happen? And there was one idea that we allow maybe only on the corners, or we allow only a 4-story in the form of either a small tower, a smaller footprint to a building. Did we have this? Oh, we have okay, we have an illustration on that. Maybe you have a 3rd floor usable terrace with some element which is 4 stories, but it's not the whole thing. So you're going to have a varied streetscape, a varied silhouette, which may be a kind of unique for your downtown. This is an illustration of building height, orientation, and massing. Here we put 4 stories, so you see that it's like a 4-story building, 3, 2, and 1. The setbacks, basically what we'll have and what the most important thing will be from this code is this drawing. This is only an illustration, and it's not going to be the law. It's basically illustrating how it may look, but this is the important one because it will show, parametric size of lots, depth, and all of that, and setbacks. It will also, we heard that it will be important for the downtown to restore your alley access. You have had historically many axes, and they were many alleys, and they were basically deleted or kind of lost in history. It will be important because most of these buildings will need servicing. So you cannot have all good fronts on 4 sides or 2 sides. So you need probably the restoration of some alleys. Urban design standards, building massing materials. This is not Bonita Springs. It's from another place, but we just like to explain what we mean by that. And these are some rules, and some of these are more guidelines than standards. Like, for example, we can advise to use, particular materials or sizes or colors for awnings. And this will not be a standard, it will be probably in your guidelines. For example, another one which is very important, and I don't think that this is, oh, here it is. Avoid strongly tinted or mirrored glass which obscures views into the store. For storefronts, this will be shall. You shall not use tinted or, or reflective glass, because this is basically death for a storefront. If they do this, it's, first they are not selling anything, they're basically hiding, and it actually kills the pedestrian movement or activity. Here, this is even more detailed signage recommendation and guideline, how you do a window sign, how you do an upper building sign, a hanging blade sign. I mean, this is basically signage to the galore, and we can actually calibrate for you 3 or 4 sign types, not like everything. You don't want to be like the world parade of signage, so this is something very important. So see here, this was a more traditional type of syntax, the same signage situation with a more modern building. And I'm showing this, basically strikingly different architectural syntaxes to show you that these are basically illustrations, and it will be up to you how much you want to influence the architecture and the look of your buildings. And here, this is how I wanted to, we wanted to illustrate the 4-story option, Instead of arguing, oh, do we want to have 4-story or not, maybe you allow it partially to happen. Here in this case, see here, it's 3 stories with just a small tower and maybe usable floor. Here, this building is 3 stories. In this case, you have, again, a bigger piece, a 4th floor tower allowed. So that's an interesting, it can create an interesting silhouette. So it's not necessarily a wall with a setback like in Naples, but basically giving the opportunity for a habitable upper terrace. And these are the different elements, a balcony, gallery, porch, and other things. A shop front here, a roof terrace here, and so forth. These are the parking access design and reductions. This is an illustration of more or less, I mean, Bonita Springs downtown is not exactly like this, but some of the stores which you have are just one story. They're very similar. They don't have a very yet a kind of a unified frontage with awnings or like any other elements, but this can be achieved. You know, like the canvas awning, the comfortable sidewalk and some passages, the plaza, on-street parking, which is already, you have it, it's completed, proper location of signage and all of these. And these are, you know, this is a long list of kind of a wish list of regulations or guidelines which we can apply or not. We don't need to. In this case, all the parking is consolidated in the back, and that's something to discuss, whether instead of looking at the parking as a single lot, that it can be a shared parking lot in the back. This is landscape standards. Of course, this is also an important portion of the code where we will be looking at the and the good news is that actually you have this already, so it's probably not going to be a lot of that. The restoration of the alleys. Here, these are some examples which we worked on preparing the introduction to the form-based code, the restoration, you know, in an area of single-family lots, how you do it, and you can basically feed the alley with garages from the back. This one is a larger assemblage of, I believe it used to be single-family lots, and then now it's a trailer park. And here we are proposing a kind of a combination of single-family housing and duplexes around a bigger green with a little alley in the back. So the restoration of the alley actually gives the potential for really a nice development, very compatible with the single-family housing, but giving a kind of a more variety of building types, you know, duplexes, and creating higher density for, you know, more attainability. Special districts and overlays. I mentioned the industrial area right now, which we call it now a special district, and we thought that it will be interesting to propose some kind of the possibility of activation of these places in a more tactical way, or like a step-by-step, or more cheaper, faster, and more interesting way. Whether it's with food trucks around some public space, maybe bringing some shipping containers initially, you know, to show that something cool is happening. Maybe artists will move in some of the buildings. I mean, it depends what you want to see. There are areas like in Miami, we have Wynwood, which was an industrial area, dangerous and crime-ridden and deserted for many, many years, and now is the coolest place in town, which has gone through several basically reincarnations. You know, there was a place where it was called Wynwood Wynwood Yard, where, you know, it was basically a parking lot with all of this happening. You know, the food trucks and a little place for yoga and performances and a kind of public gatherings and all of that. There is also a restaurant, a cluster of restaurants made of shipping containers. Now it's being redeveloped with this last kind of the last stage of development. Now it's being redeveloped by Lennar with multi-story building. So, but during the several years of basically a growth of the area, it was not just a parking lot. It was used by activated with different uses. So this is one idea. Another assemblage. You know, if you, here it is, basically the prior one which I showed you was with the one-story buildings as you have them today. This one is illustrating a little taller, but you still may keep the a kind of the smaller scale fabric of the place, and it will be up to you what lot size you're going to leave as a kind of the minimum size and what will be the maximum. You may want and say, okay, I'm going to assemble all of these in one big the possibility of somebody to come and buy everything and then consolidate, and then maybe he does a parking garage and maybe build big buildings, or it may stay in the smaller scale assembly of smaller buildings. What is important is actually to keep the scale of the building frontage, even if it's assembled in one large block, which is not, it is not going to be unexpected, or it may not be impossible unless you decided, no, we don't want to make a one full block building. That's also a possibility. But even if you allow this large assembly, we can write in rules where it will read as smaller buildings. And I'm going to show you an example later. Oh, see how this one is still the fabric, you can see that. But this effect you can actually achieve even if this is in the back like a big parking garage, let's say. We demonstrate this with the so-called bamboo site, and we had like a separate assignment and a separate task for us was to look at this area, which was basically it's on both sides of the two large city properties on both sides of the river. And I just want to demonstrate here that you can create urbanism with smaller buildings, which they look like bigger houses, and with surface parking lots. Or you can go and do something with a garage, but nevertheless you still have incremental pieces of the building. So it's not like a mega monolithic thing, which is like all of a sudden destroying the small town character of the place. So this was an exercise in shaping the scale. So we keep the scale of your town basically to, here we had like, I believe, again, see here it's like 3.5 at the most, 2 and 3 stories. Even if you have a larger scale parking in the back, or more intensive development in general, it can be regulated. The building size and height and bulk and look can be regulated with the form-based code. And I believe that that's it. Is this it? Hmm? Pardon? The rendering the other right. Yes, and this was basically, this is a rendering which was done here in Bonita Springs before we came. In this process, your a kind of community vision was about buildings which are detached buildings. It's not like continuous walls of very urban buildings. You're not Naples, you're not Miami, you're not like a big urban place. You are a smaller town, kind of South Floridian, more relaxed type of a town, which is the original charm of Bonita Springs. That's why people come here. So we believe that through the form-based code, we can calibrate this type of development. So if you have any questions or suggestions or grievances, please.
The City of Naples requires 100 square foot per barn.
We're recording, so if you just use them.
Okay. The City of Naples in Old Naples has run into a problem with parking. They don't quite have the urban atmosphere down there, even though it's quite compact. But their requirement for restaurant parking in the City of Naples is one parking space per 100 square feet of restaurant space. And so it's really kind of cut a hole in the old district, because it's just too intense, the parking is. So now restaurants are being discouraged from opening up. So how will that affect us in this area as far as parking requirements? If you're not so concerned about it by the sounds of what you said, that's going to be an issue for us going down the road.
No, I'm very concerned about the parking, actually. We are concerned about the situation with the parking because we are in transitional period of time. But I'm just alerting you not to go with the highest requirement right away, and then, then backtrack and say, oh my God, we built, let's say, 2 parking garages, big parking garages or whatever parking spaces, and now we don't need them. Just to be cautious on that side. We know that the situation with Naples, and we did the original master plan in 1990, 1993. And they will be adding another garage from what I know. Yes, and the important... Yes, yes. Perhaps, yes. And this usually happens in places which are becoming, more than their own a kind of local destination, but more of a regional destination because of the success of the Fifth Avenue South and the restaurants and everything. We definitely will look at the situation with the parking and try to have a recommendation and a standard which is flexible, something which works today, but it also can be reduced or expanded tomorrow and works, 20 years from now. Because when we did the study in 1993 or 5 or whatever it was, then there were no parking garages. The buildings were one story only, and only by restriping the on-street parking, we got like 200 extra spaces, which was quite amazing. And I believe that here you have done most of this. You have a lot of on-street parking, and you should not underestimate the. We haven't done any parking studies, and it's not part of our task this time around. But this has to be definitely taken into consideration.
Who came up with those lines go, and how movable are they between T3 and T5? And
We had a workshop with some city representatives. With one council person came to Miami, and staff members, and we looked at those. First, they are very, very close to what you have today in the current master plan. And we didn't, I don't believe it was.
on the block that my project's on, it seems you cut T3 from the back right out to the front, out to Old 41 for no reason at all. I mean,
I believe that we corrected them. Exactly what you complained before, we corrected it.
it's in the plan,
In which plan?
the one that's the presentation on the web.
Yes, this was before you came to us, and now if you look at the latest one, it's corrected.
Okay,
Yeah,
second
this was one of
question.
this was one of the
You have,
mistakes.
you have the dentist use in the
T5.
area on both sides of the river. And then there's a piece that sticks out into it. It's about 1.5 acres, which I made an offer on to buy. That all of a sudden could only be urban now? Am I correct? I mean suburban?
I don't know which piece you're talking about.
If you go down Center Street to the end, and it would be diagonally to the left.
Do we have here?
It's on the waterfront.
Okay, we have the map. You can probably point to the map. Let me see what we can see. Here it's not that big, unfortunately.
If you go back to the
Okay.
plan.
Here it is. You can come here and point.
gonna try.
This is a kind of it is a zoom in. It is in larger scale, so you can probably point here.
Oh, yeah, what I asked about is
See,
correct.
this one was different color, and we changed it
Right.
to what.
Well, that's not what I was looking at. That is
I don't know.
corrected, that.
Yes,
But
it is
this
correct.
is the one that bothers me, right here. Why did they do that? I mean, that's got a rotten old motel on it that I'd like to tear down. I've got an option to buy on it, but if you change it to, I can't have a strong commercial use there.
Which one? This one?
That's where the old motel is now.
Yeah, it just, I believe it's the platting. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make any
Yeah, no,
sense.
it
I agree
makes-
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that, yeah, probably to have, different T-zone on the same parcel is probably not a good idea, but I believe that we can look at
Street.
it, because this This is the corridor, the core.
Right.
Makes sense, yeah.
And then the other piece that I question is this piece right here. I don't want to fall. This piece right here. Okay? It faces T5. I think it should match that T5. I think that as you come around the corner, yeah. I think as you come around the corner, I mean, I agree with everything else. Those are the only ones I had any problem with at all. That and why is this Civic? They're going to try and sell this whole thing. I don't get it.
Well, is this currently, this is city land? Yeah, so, yeah.
It's what? Right, Babe Park, and that's the one they want to put out for bid.
But as we go through the process of determining what will be there, that's why we have it as Civic now, because we're going to determine what the best use of the Civic is. Does the city retain ownership and then create an RFP for the development to go there, or is it a complete sale? So none of that has been determined by council yet. Good, good. And we're going to have opportunity tomorrow for specific questions on specific properties. So I think now you're looking for general concepts at this point, and so we can spend more time if someone has a specific property.
I just wanted to ask, we had some, a recent meeting of the Downtown Alliance in which there was a little bit of confusion about exactly what properties and specifically what was involved in this. My understanding is we're talking about the city-owned public properties.
So for this workshop, this is looking at form-based code for the entire downtown corridor. More specifically, DPZ is going to be looking at the city-owned properties and creating a plan for potential development of those and options to be brought back to council and what that might look like in the future.
Follow up, how will that affect the businesses that are already there? I mean, is this going to change what they're already doing? Is this going to affect us by prohibiting things that we have already done?
So I like Galena explain a little bit more about the form-based code, but it would be implemented as you would a land development code change through the land development code process. There would be existing businesses and items that are under that would be, if there's a conflict between the uses, they would be grandfathered uses as well. But I think what Galena is explaining through the process is that the new form-based code should provide more flexibility and understanding of what the future development would look like, so there would be a clearer vision. It also sets forth exactly what that structure looks like on that property, which may then reduce the amount of public hearings and process because it would be part of that form-based code already. But any existing use that's there, that's currently operating, would be what we would consider a grandfathered use through our process.
Yes, and there will be a special section actually in the code explaining the interaction between existing businesses and future land use and zoning. I mean, I think you explained it exactly as we will do it. The intention will be to, I mean, many of the businesses are currently along, you know, the main spine on Old 41. So the commercial nature of these places will remain intact. You know, as I explained before, we're not only looking at mixed use vertically, but also horizontally. You know, buildings will be different use next to each other. Maybe just in the core area of the Old 41, it may be a requirement, but in certain areas we can have the introduction of the should. So it's like recommended guidelines and standards, not necessarily mandatory. But this is something we would like to hear actually from your alliance, and you know, if you have a list of recommendations, you can send to the city or directly to us. Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to ask if there was any intention to use any property along the railway for pedestrian or bikeways or anything like that, because that was something that people were looking to do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess it's the railroad is it kind of becomes as a kind of an existing, it's an existing amenity. You know, at least we hear that there may be some specific.
There's continuing talk between the city of Estero, sorry, the village of Estero and the city regarding what opportunities might come in the future. As of right now, that's still owned by the Seminole Gulf Railroad, and they're working out what abilities will be allowed to be negotiated with the rail line, the actual rail line, because they will only have a lease agreement to it. So there's continuing talks about what to that. Yeah, they've
Yeah,
been
on
looking
both.
at
Yeah, on both sides,
several-
basically, these are, you know, the T zones on both sides are according to what is around the neighborhood. So, but it's an interesting thing to look at, to
And we're
see how the properties will interface with the railroad.
We're continuing to monitor. The state has looked at different priority trails throughout Lee County, as well as the Sun Trail, which would take you along the beach corridor. But we continue to look at what options become available through funding through the state as well, and what we can work with them as our partners for.
What I'd like to ask is some questions about form-based codes. As an architect, when you go into a project like this, say on 041 Road, are the forms predetermined so that an architect has to take a architectural program and fit that within certain building forms to sort of fit the ideology that you might have for mass and void along the street?
That's a good question, and it's actually a difficult question, which usually we are asked by architects in places where these types of codes have been implemented. Actually, the form-based code is one which refers mostly to the public frontage of the building. The building itself, as a shape and form, remains very flexible. And here you see some drawings which, as I said, they're illustrative in nature. Many of them are not reinforced by law. The reinforcement will be basically setback and the height and all of this. The form and shape, not necessarily. There is a tendency that architects, when there is a kind of the first projects being built, and some of them are, successful, let's say, there is a tendency that architects begin to see that there is some logic in the arrangement of buildings along the road. The thing is that you already have some of the small buildings on both sides of, let's say, Old 41. The character will be very much changed if you go, 3 stories and maybe 3 stories or 4 stories. So I would say that probably the first buildings which come out of this form-based code will be very influential. Usually some of the good elements are repeated. In many cases, if something is not that good, then this can be repeated. So, but there is a lot of flexibility. We did probably the largest form-based code in the country for the city of Miami, the Miami 21 code. And we had large workshops with the local architects because there was this kind of thinking and concern among the architectural community that it will be very limiting, and oh my God, now the creativity of the architect will be really impacted. And they did studies between the current code or the prior current code and then the new code to see what is the limitation. And the result was that actually with the new code there was even more freedom. There were certain requirements which were very logical and everybody wanted them, that you cannot put basically a blank wall all the way to the sidewalk. And it used to be with the old code you could do basically a garage or even just a blank wall. That's why half of downtown Miami was basically a really not a good pedestrian environment. And then today, downtown Miami is actually, bursting with creativity and buildings of all sorts. And I don't think that architects usually complain for other reasons, but they also are under pressure, by their clients, get me more of this, get me more of that. However, we haven't experienced, that much. But it's a big city, In Miami, you expect, buildings of 50 stories or big high-rise. You can go really wild. Architects can go really wild. Here with, between 3 and 4 stories, I don't think that there is so much, so much area. And also the increment of development is much smaller. And from what I'm hearing is that the community would like this type of look. We talked about, Key West and, the old Florida cracker type of architecture and not too much, architectural experimentation.
Well, when I look at the word form-based, as an architect, that drives me to think a certain way. Now, what I did see in some of your illustrations was the variations between the more modern style of architecture than the more colonial architecture or the Caribbean architecture. But I think what I was looking for is that you could probably institute the massing of buildings along a facade such as 041 Road that would help architects contribute to what would be perceived as good form and good language and, how would you say, mass to the street. So
yes,
in
exactly.
this, I
If
think
we-
that would help a great deal.
If we, of course, this is the goal. Our purpose will be to create massing and the architecture tectonics actually to be supportive of the public realm, and then the private realm and the building itself it's left to the architect. But it's also even the architectural syntax is not something which we will impact, unless the community wants it with some architecture guidelines. We showed exactly the same building massing. One was more traditional, Florida look, and then the other one was, more contemporary. And they coexist together. I don't know whether you know some of our projects like Seaside. It's like there's basically a street wall which consists of contemporary buildings and more, traditional buildings in the same row. So style for us is not essential for us, but if it's essential for the community, we can control that as well.
Hi, Galina. One of the problems that we've faced as we've looked at redevelopment opportunities with the current map is the restrictions related to and the timeliness of being able to work with the current boundary. You mentioned expandability in your presentation. Can you talk about some specific vehicles for expansion of these areas where appropriate and how that might be referenced within a form-based code?
You mean expansion throughout the city in other areas?
Yeah, for example, if since we're talking about the T5 area and adjacent to it was a T4 or a T3 and it was along a street, if that made sense to head towards another node, or for example, Dean Street is a common one, what mechanisms would exist, or what would you propose in terms of, what you were speaking there of expandability that wouldn't necessarily, require a new comp plan amendment or a full rewrite to the land development code that would, necessarily hold things back?
Well, I believe it can be done probably with an overlay districts in the nodes, in the nodal, nodal areas. I don't know whether you're familiar with our Bonita Beach Road study, where we had shown, again, the TRANSECT applied to some of these areas. So it's up to your leadership, your staff to decide basically whether they want to do that. I mean, it has been done in many other places.
So, but as far as a mechanism, though, that would allow that expansion, do you have any specific thoughts or experiences with what those mechanisms in the code are?
I don't know. What kind of mechanism? You basically apply this type of form-based code. First you adopt it here in the downtown, and then you say it can be expanded within these areas. It can be applied to these areas, as simple as that. We have done this actually, now I'm reminded, we did it in Georgia, outside of Atlanta, in a place called Mableton, where they adopted, I don't think it was called, they didn't want neither the word smart code because they were allergic to smart growth, just as a, as a term. I think it was traditional neighborhood design or something like that, TND overlay. It wasn't like an overlay, I believe. No, it wasn't an overlay. It was for the Mableton area. It was a the code was the only one. It replaced the prior. Now I'm not even certain. I'm not 100% sure. But it was basically they could apply it in all of the Cobb County. They made it in a way that they said, okay, this one is in this area, you know, and we approve it for Mableton, but it's also applicable to other places. And they were applying it to other small towns within the county. So I think it's definitely possible.
And then one other short question, unrelated to that altogether, but do you find that in most of the form-based codes that you implement with cities that you eliminate the use regulation from the land development code as part of it?
No, we don't. We do not. You know, there is the use. It's not eliminated. It is more blended. Like, for example, in areas which are the urban general, you know, the T4 zone, we allow maybe a wider range of building types. This is something which actually I didn't talk about more extensively. In the T zones, we allow a more varied range of building types. Like in T3 is, yes, predominantly single family housing. We know that this is the more untouchable and people don't like to, you know, the larger lots, whether it's historic or whatever neighborhood, it stays more or less intact. In T4, we begin to expand the menu of building types. Like, for example, you know, as I mentioned, yes, small apartment buildings, townhouses, and uses, like, for example, if you have live-work units, or maybe certain corners, you can have some limited other use besides residential. And it can be home office, maybe in an outbuilding, or a home office in a, I don't know, in a live-work condition, or stuff like that. And then in T5, you have a kind of the widest range of uses. As I mentioned before, you know, like the lodging use, which can be from motel to bed and breakfast to hotel to you name it. Now with Airbnb and all of this stuff, everything is even more complicated, but we basically allow a wider range. We don't eliminate it entirely.
Hi, I'm a land use planner who lives in downtown Bonita. I'm originally from Miami, and I grew up in Miami Lakes, which you might know has a very specific area called Main Street, which is mixed use. Growing up there, you get to see the residential and the commercial components working together. But one issue that has always been there is that it is not an affordable place to live. Coming over to this coast, Estero, Bonita, and Naples all seem to share the same problem, which is a very high seasonal population that affects the real estate market here. How is this going to work to promote workforce housing, or are additional policies going to be implemented to allow that to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I was talking about, you know, the younger generation, which is probably the most in need for this workforce housing, or attainable or affordable housing, or, you know, whatever we want to call this type of housing. I think that first and foremost, a wider range of building types allowed in the downtown area will be number one. You know, so you will have a variety. It's not going to be just single family houses and then they're commercial. Right now it's more or less like that. You're now introducing bigger buildings, you know, the Mosaic and other, you know, the Terry Street projects, you know, but they're kind of on both extremes, you know, the big stuff and then the little stuff and nothing in between. You know, you can have, and the current master, the current zoning or overlay plan or whatever you call it right now, it is basically, it allows for some of these new types to happen. And I think that this is a natural progression towards a more attainable housing. Whether it's a percentage of housing required for workforce housing or whatever, these are policies which have to come, you know, from the community. Our contribution can be to allow through the buildings to have affordability, whether it's an outbuilding, I like accessory unit. You know, that's also attainable housing. You can rent a small house with an apartment above to allow for these types of buildings, for small apartments, as I said, for duplexes, for attached housing of all sorts, and for cottage courts. You know, there is a whole range of smaller building types which are more affordable in their, basically in their, you know, structure, size, location, and all of that. You know, if you go single family housing, that's you know, it's the land, when you put the land and everything else, it becomes expensive right there, including the larger scale development, which is also, you know, when you assemble the land and you do the amenities and the parking and everything, then the affordability all of a sudden disappears. If you want to enable people to participate in this process, actually you have to keep some of the increments, you know, affordable and smaller and you know, cheaper for that matter. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, another feature of form-based codes, and Miami 21 did this very effectively, was to come up with a list of incentives for the developers of the assemblages and the larger parcels. That part of the requirement, and maybe in speed of approvals, or in order to enable them to achieve higher densities or other features, is to participate in a public benefit fund, whether it's actual money to a particular fund, or offering to build affordable housing, to maybe create a park somewhere. There's a series, and that's completely within the realm of the possible, and the city can help us decide on what that list should be. And affordable housing could be a major component of that.
I do have a second question. Was any analysis of Old 41 in the downtown segment part of your scope?
What do you mean, analysis?
The actual transportation along Old 41. Currently from the roundabout on Terry Street down to almost Pennsylvania, which is the second roundabout, traffic is usually very, very heavy during this time of year and during special peak hours. Has that been looked at? Do you know how that may affect something like this?
Such a study was not part of our contract or our analysis. We know that basically the development up north, you know, many people live to the north, and right now we were in peak hour. So we saw the traffic, you know, we were coming south, and there was nobody, but going north on Old 41, it was really packed. This is, you will not be able to improve this traffic by making Old 41 wider, or, you know, this will not be a matter of, it will not be a matter of a kind of pavement width. It will be a matter of changing your basically land use combination. You know, you need places of mixed use where people basically live and they don't need to commute up north. So, you know, by creating a downtown which is, you know, with a strong residential component may alleviate to some extent, but not necessarily. Unfortunately, your pattern of development here in the city, and I have said this before, has been sprawling for many years. So you have all this discontinuity between north, south, east, west. You have very limited. That's why Bonita Beach Road, when we did that study, and this was part of our analysis, we have traffic engineers working on it. You know, it's really your main corridor, and east-west you don't have enough connectivity. North-south, you know, are just the major arteries, and Old 41 happens to be. This is actually, the traffic there is a blessing, and I mean it's a big detriment, you know, because it's, you know, yeah, but it's also, on the other hand, it's actually a plus, because yes, people go north-south, they want to go up north fast because of your new infrastructure, which was actually very correct to keep the smaller cross-section and not to allow for some highway to basically interrupt your downtown. You have the chance to build something where people go to and not just bypass. If they want to bypass, they have to go to the highways. If they want to go through your downtown, maybe they will stop and have a coffee or buy something in the place, you know, in the downtown instead of just, zoom through it. So actually, I would say that that's maybe a more positive than negative phenomenon right now.
How long is the process going to take to implement a form-based code?
Well, it depends. We are now only at the beginning of the process. We are contracted just for this introductory phase and the the content, the table of contents phase. So we don't know, whether we will be even extending this process further. If all goes well, these processes take from 6 months to 12 months. Miami 21 for the whole city of Miami took 4 years. Well, hopefully here for just, the downtown will be shorter period
We're
of
not
time.
quite as big as Miami.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Well, we have done such codes for, where did we do them? Fort Myers, we did one for Fort Myers, we did for Sarasota, we did, Miami and a bunch of other. West Palm Beach, we did it, this was 20 years ago, but it takes a few months. It depends on the complexity. It depends also on the support of the community. If, it's like if there is thinking that this is good for the community and people want it, it's a faster process. It depends, yeah.
The council built on a stop point at this point, as Galena will be here tomorrow night to kind of give an update of all the feedback we're receiving, provide this outline, this introduction. At that point, council will decide if they want to move to the next steps. If that concludes any questions this evening, just as a reminder, DPZ is here during the day tomorrow. We already do have some individuals who've made appointments during their office hours for tomorrow. If there's anyone who needs any specific appointment, please let us know. We can work with you on that. And additionally, they'll be presenting a shortened version of this tomorrow evening and providing some feedback they received to the council tomorrow evening as we continue the process, and they'll be looking for further direction from City Council on the next steps.
Thank you. Thank you.